Rain hammered the jungle like an endless drumline, turning the air thick and heavy. Captain Ryan Holt crouched low in the muck, his rifle balanced across his knees, eyes scanning the tree line. The mission had gone exactly as planned until it didn't. They had moved under cover of darkness, infiltrating the enemy compound with precision. Inside, they'd found the weapons cache, crates of AK-47s, RPGs, and enough ammunition to arm a battalion. The demolition had been textbook charges planted, timers set, the kind of work the SEALs could do blindfolded. The explosions lit up the night sky like a 4th of July finale. It should have been the signal for their ride out. But when Ryan keyed his comm for the extraction signal, the line was dead. "Try the secondary channel," he ordered. Chief Petty Officer Lawson twisted the dials, listening to nothing but static. No good. They're jamming. The realization hit like a gut punch. Their location wasn't just compromised, the enemy knew exactly where they were, and they were cutting off every escape route. "Cap, you're going to want to see this." Petty Officer First Class Morales called from the ridgeline. Ryan moved fast, boots slipping in the wet clay, and joined him. Below them, the valley road, their original exfil route, was gone. Not blocked, gone. The bridge they needed was a twisted heap of steel in a roaring flood channel. They knew we'd try to leave this way, Morales said grimly. Ryan's mind spun through options. The alternate pickup point was a makeshift dirt strip 60 miles to the west, carved out years ago for humanitarian drops. It was barely serviceable even in dry weather, but after the past week's torrential downpours, it had been written off entirely. The last intel update had labeled it inoperable, unsafe for landings. "Any chance we can get a bird there?" Ryan asked over comms, knowing the answer before it came. "Negative," Command replied after a beat. "Runways washed out. Helicopters can't make the range with your full team, and wounded." Wounded. Ryan glanced back at Corpsman Dell, kneeling beside Petty Officer Walker, whose thigh was wrapped in bloody gauze. The corpsman gave him a look that said, "We're running out of time." Gunfire echoed from the north, distant, but getting closer. "They're corralling us," Lawson said flatly, pushing us toward the open. Ryan dropped to one knee, spreading the map across the mud. His men formed a tight circle, eyes scanning the perimeter even as they listened. "We move southwest," he said, stabbing a finger at the barely marked dirt airstrip. "It's a long shot, but it's the only flat ground big enough to take a transport. If Command won't send one, they'll send one," Morales cut in. "They have to." Ryan didn't answer. He knew how many things had to go right for that to happen. They packed light, no extra gear, no unnecessary weight, and slipped back into the jungle. The rain masked their movement, but it also slowed them to a crawl. Twice they had to stop to tend to Walker's wound, and once to evade a patrol that came within 20 yards of their position. By dawn, they were soaked to the bone, their uniforms plastered to their skin. They reached the edge of a rise and could just make out the flat, open expanse that had once been the airstrip. It was worse than Ryan had imagined. The center was a pool of standing water, glinting under the gray light. The edges were rutted and broken, with debris scattered like shrapnel from some long-forgotten battle. Morales muttered, "No planes landing there. Not today." Ryan ignored him. "Set perimeter. Hold position until I can get command on." The line. They hunkered down in the ruins of an old maintenance shack at the strip's edge. The corrugated roof leaked, but it offered a little concealment. Ryan keyed his comm again, praying the signal would punch through. "This is Strike Team Delta, requesting immediate extraction at Grid 27 Alpha. Urgent medical. Enemy forces in pursuit. Over." Static hissed back at him. He tried again. And again. Finally, a voice broke through, faint, but clear enough to recognize. Copy, Delta. We hear you. Extraction by C-130 is the only option, but the voice hesitated. That strip's been condemned. You'd be asking a pilot to put down on a swamp. Ryan's jaw tightened. Then find me a pilot crazy enough to try. There was a long pause, as if command was weighing whether it was even worth attempting. When the reply came, it wasn't an assurance. It was a promise that hung somewhere between hope and desperation. Stand by. We might have someone. Ryan closed his eyes for just a second, letting the sound of the rain fill the silence. Out there, somewhere beyond the mountains and the storm, he imagined a pilot strapping in, glancing at a map, and wondering if it was worth risking their life for a dozen wet, muddy, half-dead seals. Whoever they were, Ryan knew one thing. If they didn't come soon, the jungle would be the last thing any of them ever saw. The storm had been chewing on forward operating base Harper all night, rattling the sheet metal walls of the hangars and spitting rain through any gap it could find. Captain Aaron Wallace sat at a desk inside operations, half listening to the monotonous drone of the weather report. It wasn't her shift to fly. It hadn't been for a long time. She was supposed to be transitioning, command's polite term for keeping a combat pilot out of the cockpit without technically grounding them. 2 years ago, she'd crash-landed a burning 100 to 130 in Syria after an engine failure and walked away without a scratch. Her crew had survived too, but the brass had seen it as a sign. Too much risk in keeping her in combat rotation. So now she signed off on cargo manifests, approved flight schedules, and watched younger pilots do the work her hands still itched for. She was halfway through her second coffee when the radio on the wall crackled, urgent and clipped. Command, this is Delta Team. Extraction Priority 1. Enemy closing fast. Urgent medevac required. Aaron froze. Special Forces. Real trouble. The duty officer on comms took the call, jotting coordinates on a pad. His expression changed as he read them. Sir? He called to the flight ops commander, who was hunched over a map. They're at 27 Alpha. I know where it is, the commander said sharply. He pushed away from the table and came over. That's the washed-out strip west of the flood zone. The duty officer's brow furrowed. Sir, they're requesting C-130 extraction. Aaron's eyes flicked from the radio to the commander. A C-130 on that strip was madness. Every pilot here knew it. The commander sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. No chance. The last. Recon said it's underwater. Half the surface collapsed. We'd bury the wheels on touchdown. Best we can do is get helicopters in range, but with their wounded and the weather, he didn't finish. Everyone knew helicopters wouldn't make it before the SEALs were overrun. The comms tech repeated Delta's last transmission. If you can't send a plane, you'd better send a priest. The commander turned to the room. Anyone willing to even try that landing would be signing their own death warrant. Aaron stood up slowly. I'll take it. Heads turned. She wasn't even in flight rotation. The commander frowned. Captain Wallace, you haven't flown combat in 2 years, she cut in. Yes, sir. I know exactly how long it's been. I also know I've landed a Herc on a 2,400-foot dirt strip in Kandahar with an engine out, under fire, in crosswinds worse than this storm. And I know those guys out there have maybe an hour before they're overrun. No one else here has. The flight hours I do. You want a pilot for this. You're looking at her. The hangar fell silent except for the rain on the roof. The commander searched her face for hesitation, for bravado, anything to tell him she wasn't serious. But all he saw was the steady, unflinching stare of someone who had already decided. You understand, he said slowly. This is a one-shot landing. No go-arounds. You screw up, You won't be able to take off again? Erin didn't blink. Understood. But I don't plan on screwing up. A moment later, the decision was made. She was signed back onto the active roster. For one mission only. The crew was already gathering at the C-130 when Erin jogged into the hangar. Senior Loadmaster Brooks eyed her skeptically as she climbed aboard. Thought you were office-bound these days, Cap? Guess I got bored, she said, running. Her hands over the control panel, feeling the familiar hum of the systems under her fingertips. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Sam Kerrigan, slid into the right seat. You're really gonna try it? That strip's a swamp. Erin strapped in, flipping switches in practiced rhythm. It's not a swamp. It's a runway with character, Brooks snorted. Character'll get us killed. She glanced back at him. Only if you pack us too heavy. Keep it tight. Med gear, ammo, minimal rations. We're not flying a cargo run. We're flying a lifeline. In the planning room, they pulled up the latest satellite images. The washed-out strip looked worse in real time. One end was submerged. The middle was cratered from erosion. Only a narrow wedge of hard surface remained, and even that was partially blocked by debris. No way to land from the east, Kerrigan muttered. Trees are too high. No approach corridor. Then we'll come from the west, Erin said. That's the short side, Brooks protested. She traced the descent path with a finger. We'll come in low through the valley, riding the wind shear to bleed speed. We've got maybe 2,300 feet before we hit mud, so we put her down hard. Reverse thrust full. Pray the brakes don't fail. Pray? Kerrigan raised an eyebrow. Figure of speech, Erin said. Mostly. As they taxied toward the runway, the tower's voice crackled over the radio. Harper 1 to 9. Be advised. Ground fire reported and wrote. Storm system overhead moving east. Visibility minimal. Copy, Tower, Erin replied. She glanced at Kerrigan. Once we're out there, no chatter unless it's critical. Eyes up, hands steady. The engines roared to full power, the vibrations running through the seat into her bones. She eased the throttles forward, feeling the aircraft surge down the runway. At rotation speed, she pulled back and the C-130 lifted into the gray. Rain streaked across the windshield, wipers thumping in time with her heartbeat. The mountains rose ahead, jagged silhouettes against the storm. In the back, Brooks secured the cargo, his voice carrying faintly through the intercom. Cargo secure, ramp ready. Kerrigan glanced at the fuel gauge. Plenty to get there and back. If we make it. Erin didn't answer. She was already picturing the approach in her head, the way the aircraft would buck in the wind, the split-second timing to plant it on solid ground before momentum dragged them into the flooded section. Somewhere beyond the mountains, 12 men were waiting in the ring, fighting for their lives. She didn't know their faces, their names, or what their mission had been. But she knew this. If she didn't make that landing, they'd never see. Home again. She tightened her grip on the yoke. Let's go get our guys. The storm didn't let up. Sheets of rain lashed the C-130's windscreen as Erin and her crew flew over a jagged ridgeline, banking to avoid radar detection. In the cramped cockpit, Kerrigan kept one hand on the chart and the other on the radar. Scope. We're 20 minutes out from the strip, he said, eyes narrowing. Satellite imagery, updated 24 hours ago. Want me to pull it up? Erin nodded. Show me. On the small screen, the washed-out airstrip flickered into view. The image was grainy, but merciless. The center section was a deep brown smear of standing water. The west end, the only feasible approach, was littered with debris, tree branches, jagged chunks of asphalt, even what looked like a rusted-out vehicle abandoned years ago. Kerrigan whistled under his breath. No way this meets minimum landing requirements. We've got, what, 2,300 feet of usable surface. And that's if we dodge the holes. From the jump seat, Brooks leaned forward. Sir, with the load we're carrying, that's not enough runway for a safe landing. We're going to overshoot or bury the wheels. Erin kept her voice calm. We're not landing safe. We're landing possible. Big difference. Brooks shook his head. And if you misjudge by 20 feet? Then the seals die in the mud while we circle overhead, Erin said flatly. I'm not letting that happen. The radio crackled. Command was on the line. Harker 1 to 9, be advised. That strip is officially listed as inoperable. Our Flight Ops Division has deemed it unlandable. Recommend abort and switch to alternative extraction. Kerrigan gave her a sidelong glance. Here it comes. Erin keyed the mic. Command, be advised. Alternative extraction will not reach the team before enemy forces do. This is not a request. It's a statement. We are proceeding with landing attempt. I'll take responsibility. Static filled the channel for a moment before Command answered, tone clipped. Understood. You have one shot, Captain. Make it count. Erin zoomed in on the topography surrounding the strip. We can't come in high. We'll need to drop through this valley here. Steep descent, low throttle. Then ride the wind shear from the storm front to bleed speed fast. We'll be close enough to kiss the treetops. Kerrigan frowned. That's going to dump. US on to final at an angle. We'll have crosswind from the left at 20 knots, maybe more. Good, Erin said. I'll use it to kill our airspeed faster. We touch down nose up, reverse thrust full, brakes locked. Brooks muttered. Brakes'll be slick as hell in that mud. You're betting everything on traction. I'm betting everything on experience, Erin replied, her tone final. As the minutes ticked down, the cockpit settled into tense silence. Outside, lightning flashed over the mountains, briefly illuminating the vast green canopy below. The valleys were choked with mist, the rain pounding hard enough to drum against the fuselage. Kerrigan broke the silence. You've done something like this before? Afghanistan, 2011, Erin said without looking up. Night drop into a valley strip that had been chewed up by mortar. Lost an engine halfway in. Landed anyway. And got chewed out for a month. But everyone I picked up got home. That's the part one remember. 10 minutes out, she switched to internal comms. All crew, brace for combat landing. Ramp stays closed until I say otherwise. We'll be in and out fast. Loadmaster, once we're down, you have 90 seconds to get them aboard before we roll. Brooks' voice came back, steady but tight. Copy. I'll have the ramp controls. Hot. 5 minutes out, the terrain began to rise sharply. Erin pushed the yoke forward, diving into the valley. The altimeter wound down fast. Kerrigan's eyes stayed on the radar scope. No confirmed anti-air, but I'm seeing possible A positions on the North Ridge. We'll be too low for them to get a good lock, Erin said. Unless they're really lucky. Comforting, Kerrigan muttered. Then the strip came into view. Even through the rain and mist, Erin could see how bad it was. The west end looked like an abandoned construction site, standing water reflecting the storm, chunks of asphalt breaking the smoothness, and a dozen places where the ground had simply collapsed into muddy craters. Kerrigan swore under his breath. That's worse than the sad images. Yeah, Erin said softly, which means we have even less runway than we thought. She tightened her grip on the yoke, lining up the descent. This is it, no turning back. Brooks' voice came from the back. Captain, I hope you've got a guardian angel on payroll. Erin smirked faintly. Guardian angels fly co-pilot. Final approach. The altimeter needle spun down. The roar of the engines vibrated through the cockpit, the storm wind slamming at the aircraft's broad frame. Kerrigan called out the descent. Rate, 500 feet per minute, 450. 400, hold it steady, Aaron said, nudging the yoke to correct for a gust. The tree line was close enough to see individual leaves shivering in the wind. 300 feet. The debris on the runway was clearer now. The rusted-out vehicle, the broken asphalt, a half-submerged log. Erin adjusted her aim, angling to hit the driest section. 200 feet. Crosswind shoved the nose left. She corrected instantly. 100 feet. The strip rushed toward them, a narrow, treacherous ribbon of ground. Brace! She shouted. Into the intercom. The wheels slammed down with bone-jarring force, water spraying high from the tires. Reverse thrust engaged instantly, the roar echoing across the flooded airfield. The fuselage shuddered as brakes locked, the C-130 fighting. Against the slick mud. The nose slewed slightly left, then right, before Aaron caught it with a sharp rudder kick. They were decelerating, but the mud was eating runway faster than the brakes were biting. 50 feet from the mud pit that marked the unusable section. They stopped. Aaron exhaled once hard. Ramp down. Get them. The moment Aaron called, ramp down, the hydraulics hissed and groaned, lowering the massive steel door into the rain-soaked mud. The smell of wet earth and fuel mixed in the air. Brooks and the load crew leapt into motion, strapping down. Med gear, hauling extra ammo crates forward so they could be handed out to the SEALs the second they stepped inside. The storm still howled across the valley, but beneath its roar came another sound, distant gunfire. Short bursts, controlled. SEAL discipline. Aaron's gut tightened. Kerrigan, keep eyes on that ridge, she ordered, pointing to the north where mist swirled around the treetops. That's where they'll try to cut them off. Copy, he said, already sweeping the area with binoculars. In the jungle less than a mile away, Captain Ryan's team moved as fast as mud and exhaustion would allow. Walker, pale and barely conscious, was slung between Morales and Dell, his rifle bouncing against his chest. Every man's gear was slick with rain, their boots caked with heavy sludge that sucked at each step. 200 meters. Morales called, spotting the faint gray shape of the C-130 through the curtain of rain. Then the first mortar landed. The ground shook, throwing Ryan forward onto his hands. The next round slammed into the tree line just behind them, showering them with splinters. Go, go! Ryan shouted, waving them forward. Enemy spotters had eyes on them now. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before the valley became a kill zone. From the cockpit, Kerrigan spotted the explosions. Contact. North Ridge, maybe 200 meters from their path. Aaron didn't flinch. Hold position. If I move now, they'll have to run farther. They need straight access to the ramp. Brooks' voice came through the intercom, urgent. Captain, we're exposed here. If they bring up heavier fire, they already have heavier fire. Aaron cut in. This bird's not leaving without them. The SEALs broke from the tree line into the open stretch of mud leading to the C-130. Brooks and his crew waved frantically, guiding them in. Rain slicked the ramp, making every step treacherous, but adrenaline kept them moving. Behind them, figures emerged from the trees. Enemy fighters, rifles flashing in the gloom. The load crew opened fire from the ramp with M4S, laying down suppressive bursts. The SEALs returned fire even as they ran, bullets cutting through the storm in tight, controlled lines. Ryan was the third to last aboard, shoving Morales and Dell ahead of him with Walker between them. He turned to fire one last burst toward the tree line before sprinting up the ramp. Brooks hit the control to raise it, shouting, "Ramp's coming up! Everyone inside!" The door began to rise, sealing them into the dim, humming belly of the aircraft. Clear to move? Kerrigan asked, watching the last SEAL stagger into the cabin. "Clear," Brooks confirmed over comms. "Everyone's in. We've got wounded." Aaron's hands tightened on the throttles. "Then we're rolling." The C-130 lurched forward, engines straining as the wheels churned through the sodden ground. The broken strip rushed past beneath them, jagged asphalt, puddles big enough to swallow a jeep. Halfway down, a burst of tracer fire streaked from the ridge, arcing toward them. "Taking fire, 2 o'clock." Kerrigan called out. "Hang on," Aaron said. She shoved the throttles to max, feeling the aircraft surge forward. A mortar exploded somewhere off their right wing, the blast rattling the fuselage. "Speed?" she asked. 80 knots. Kerrigan replied. "We need 120 for rotation. Come on, girl." Aaron muttered under her breath. The end of the usable strip was seconds away. Beyond it lay a swampy stretch that would drag the C-130 to a dead stop or flip it outright. 95, 100. Aaron's knuckles whitened on the yoke. 110, 115. She pulled back. The nose lifted, the wheels clinging to the slick ground for a heartbeat before breaking free. They skimmed the treetops, but landing gear almost brushing wet leaves. Aaron banked hard to the right, pulling them out of the mortar's arc and into the low cloud cover. Kerrigan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. "We're up. We're climbing." Brooks' voice came through from the cargo bay, steady but tinged with relief. "All accounted for. 1 critical, 2 stable. Corman's working on them now." Aaron kept her eyes forward. "Tell them to hold on. We're not clear yet." Because climbing out was only half the battle. The valley narrowed ahead, forcing them into a twisting path between ridges. The C-130 wasn't built for this kind of weaving, but Aaron kept her turns tight, skirting the edge of the radar shadow while staying low enough to avoid surface-to-air locks. Kerrigan monitored their 6. "Looks like they're scrambling vehicles down there, but they're not going to keep pace." "Good," Aaron said. "Let's keep it that way." Minutes later, they broke through the last pass, the jungle, giving way to rolling hills and then open plains. The worst of the storm was behind them, but sheets of rain still streaked the windscreen. In the cargo bay, Ryan unbuckled and made his way forward, steadying himself on handholds. He stepped into the cockpit, helmet under one arm. "You just saved 12 men who were about 30 seconds from getting wiped out," he said simply. Aaron didn't look away from the horizon. "You brought them this far. I just gave you a lift the last few miles." Ryan gave a tight smile. "That lift was one hell of a trick. Thank you, Captain." Aaron allowed herself the faintest smile back. "Don't thank me until we land." The C-130's nose was now pointed directly at the battered strip, and the world outside had narrowed to a single tunnel in Captain Lauren Kane's mind. Her hands gripped the control yoke with a calm steadiness that masked the adrenaline surging in her veins. Every instinct in her screamed that what she was attempting was madness, but there was no other option. 40 yards beyond the landing zone, the earth fell away into a deep ravine. On either side, jagged wreckage from old airframes rusted in the dirt like tombstones, a grim reminder of pilots who had misjudged their approach. Over the headset, the SEAL commander's voice was urgent, but measured. "Kane, you've got 1 shot at this. Enemy patrols are sweeping in from the north. You've got 7 minutes before they cut you off." 7 minutes. In that time, she needed to drop 120,000 pounds of aircraft onto a crumbling dirt runway 1 that hadn't seen maintenance in over a decade, and bring it to a dead stop before the end of the strip swallowed them whole. "Copy," she replied, her voice even. 7 minutes is 5 too many. She began the final checklist with her co-pilot, Mason, a seasoned flyer whose eyes kept darting to the fuel gauge and the damage readouts from the last near miss over the hills. "Landing gear down," Kane ordered. The C-130 shuddered as its massive wheels unfolded, locking into place with a dull metallic thump. The storm of dirt and debris on the ground told her crosswinds would be an issue. She could already feel the subtle yaw in the aircraft's frame. Adjusting the rudder pedals under her boots, she compensated, but her mind kept running ahead. Where exactly had the strip washed out? Could the left wheel take the brunt if the right sank into a rut? Would the hydraulics hold under sudden braking? Through the windscreen, the washed-out section came into view, a 50-foot stretch in the middle of the runway, a wound carved into the earth by recent floods. It was less a runway now and more a gamble. If her front wheels hit that section too soon, they'd dig in and send the aircraft cartwheeling. If she came in too long, they'd overshoot straight into the ravine. The SEAL team leader's voice cut in again, more urgent now. "We've got contact on the perimeter. If you can't land, tell me now, and we'll—" "Negative, Kane." Interrupted, her tone flat but final. "Strap in." Her training had taught her how to ignore everything except the immediate. The airspeed, a descent angle, the sound of the engines. She pulled the throttles back. The C-130 groaned in protest, its 4 turboprops fighting gravity as she eased the nose down. Below, the SEALs had moved into defensive positions, rifles sweeping the tree line. In the shadows, shapes moved enemy scouts, testing the outer defenses. Kane saw it all in flashes as she adjusted her line, her breathing slow and deliberate. She aimed to touch down just beyond the washed-out section. That meant she'd have to approach lower than standard, coming in barely above stall speed. It was a maneuver pilots avoided for good reason. There was zero room for recovery if the aircraft lost lift. "Angled steep," Mason warned, eyes fixed on the altimeter. "I know," Kane said, her gaze locked on the edge of the strip. The C-130 roared closer, its shadow racing ahead across the cracked ground. At this range, she could see the shrapnel scars along the strip's edge, where some past firefight had left twisted metal embedded in the dirt. She made a mental note to veer a hair to the left. Wind gusted hard from the side, and for a heartbeat, the aircraft drifted toward the tree line. Kane's arms moved instinctively, correcting, her boots pressing the rudder pedals in a delicate dance of pressure. The aircraft responded, sluggish but loyal, angling back toward the center line. Her right hand rested lightly on the throttles, her left gripping the yoke. She felt every vibration through her fingers, every subtle tremor of a machine pushed to its limits, 300 feet. She heard her own heartbeat in her ears now, each thump in sync with the rise and fall of the altimeter needle. The ravine loomed at the far end, a dark slash in the earth that would not forgive a single miscalculation. 200 feet. The SEALs were waving her in, their silhouettes stark against the dust. A flash from the north tree line caught her eye muzzle. Fire. She ignored it. 100 feet. She eased the throttles back a fraction more, feeling the C-130 sink. The washed-out section slid under her nose, and she adjusted the flare with surgical precision. 50 feet. The landing gear screamed as it caught the first rough patch of dirt. The aircraft bounced once, hard enough to rattle every bolt in the frame. Kane's teeth clenched, but she held the yoke steady. The second impact was smoother, the wheels gripping the earth. The washed-out section blurred beneath them, and she felt the subtle sag as the right wheel dipped into the softened dirt just for a fraction of a second before the aircraft surged past it. She pulled the throttles fully idle and engaged maximum reverse thrust. The roar from the engines became a hurricane inside the cockpit. Dust exploded around them, the strip vanishing in a haze. Her boots braced hard against the pedals as the brakes screamed in protest. The ravine rushed toward them. Mason's hand hovered near the emergency brake release. Kane didn't flinch. The speed bled off yard by yard, the C-130's frame shuddering as it fought to stop. 20 yards from the edge, they came to a full, jarring halt. For a moment, the only sound was the wind tearing across the strip. Kane's knuckles slowly loosened on the yoke. She could hear her own breath, calm again. In the rear of the aircraft, the ramp began to lower, and the SEAL team moved fast-hauling crates, wounded, and intel aboard in a blur of motion. Outside, the enemy gunfire grew louder. Kane glanced at Mason, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Told you 7 minutes was too much. They were still in enemy territory, still under fire, but for now, just for a moment, they'd beaten the odds. The C-130's wheels finally left the ground, and for the first time in hours, the cockpit wasn't rattling under gunfire or debris, but the tension didn't fade. Inside the cargo bay, the SEALs were strapped in, silent, their faces lit by the red glow of the jump lights. Outside, the storm was now fully awake. Jagged spears of lightning clawed at the black sky, and turbulence punched the aircraft hard enough to knock loose a few unsecured crates. Captain Jenna Rains gripped the yoke with white knuckles, eyes locked on the green phosphor glow of her night vision display. The GPS readout flashed a warning. Target LZ compromised. She didn't need the machine to tell her that. Her headset crackled with the voice of the forward air controller on the ground. Eagle 3, this is ground zero. Original drop zone's a swamp now. Repeat, completely flooded. Her jaw tightened. The plan had been to deliver the SEALs just outside the ridgeline, close enough for a quick move on foot, far enough to avoid detection. But the monsoon's relentless assault had turned the landing zone into a mirror of water, useless for parachute landings. Worse, enemy scouts had been spotted less than 2 clicks from the area. Rains took a deep breath, steadying her voice. Ground zero, we need another option. I can't keep circling in this soup forever. A pause. Static. Then the voice came back, urgent but controlled. There's an old logging road north of your position. 200 meters of semi-clear ground. But it's barely wide enough for the drop. And you've got enemy trucks moving toward it from the west. The SEAL team leader, Commander Briggs, stepped into the cockpit, bracing himself against the bulkhead as turbulence jolted the aircraft. We'll take it. If they're coming, we go in hot. Your job's just to get us low and over that strip. She glanced at him. His tone was calm, but his eyes told another story. They all knew this was going to be a knife's-edge maneuver. She pushed the throttle forward, the engine screaming as the C-130 dove lower. The altimeter wound down. 5,000 feet? 3,000. 1,500. Through the haze and sheets of rain, the outline of the old road appeared on her display, narrow, crooked, and hemmed in by jungle. The wind was a living thing, shoving the aircraft sideways. She corrected with precise, deliberate movements, but sweat beaded on her forehead. This wasn't like flying a clean runway approach. This was threading a needle, while the needle itself tried to kill you. In the cargo bay, the SEALs prepped for the jump. Gear was checked, weapons secured, harness straps pulled tight. Red light above the ramp bathed them in a ghostly glow. One of them muttered something about no second chances, and no one disagreed. A sharp tone sounded in her headset. Radar contact. 2 enemy trucks were now less than 2 miles from the drop zone. If they weren't on the ground and moving within minutes, the SEAL's window would slam shut. Rains keyed her mic. Briggs, 30 seconds. Make them count. The light flipped from red to green. The ramp yawned open, letting the storm roar into the fuselage. The SEALs moved in unison. One by one, they vanished into the night, swallowed by the rain and darkness. The second the last man disappeared, she pulled hard into a climbing turn, engines howling, pushing the C-130 away from the ridge. The aircraft shuddered violently as she banked, turbulence hammering the wings. Her instruments lit up with warnings. Low altitude, crosswinds, airspeed fluctuations. Below, flashes of light marked the arrival of the enemy trucks at the drop site. Rains could picture the SEALs already moving through the jungle, their landing hidden by the rain, their presence unknown to the arriving patrol. For now, the comms crackled again, a brief burst from Riggs's encrypted radio. Package is on the ground, moving to target. That was all she needed to hear. The mission had just shifted from get them out alive to make sure they can finish what they came for. She had one more job: create enough chaos in the sky to keep eyes off the ground. She keyed the weapons officer in the back. A loadmaster trained for emergency air support. Prep the flares. Let's light up their world. Moments later, the C-130's belly erupted in a cascade of magnesium-white fire, streaking across the clouds. Enemy anti-air crews scrambled, their aim pulled toward the bright distractions overhead. Every second they spent firing at her was a second they weren't tracking the SEALs. By the time she was clear of the zone, the storm had swallowed the aircraft again. The adrenaline was still coursing through her veins, but her hands never left the controls. There was no victory yet. She knew this mission had more teeth waiting just ahead. The SEALs were on the ground, the enemy was alert, and the clock was ticking. For Jenna Rains, the night wasn't even close to over. The night was a black canvas, streaked only by the occasional lightning flash miles away over the ocean. Inside the cockpit of the C-130, Captain Sarah Whitaker's fingers hovered over the controls, her jaw tight. Every instrument panel glowed in muted reds and greens, casting sharp shadows across her face. Outside, the dimly lit coastline loomed closer with each passing second. Below, the washed-out landing strip lay in pieces, a torn, jagged mess of dirt, debris, and puddles that reflected the starlight like shards of broken glass. In any normal mission, a pilot would abort, but tonight wasn't normal. 34 SEALs were pinned down in hostile territory, their extraction route cut off. The C-130 was their only way home. 2 minutes to final, came the calm but tense voice of her co-pilot, Lieutenant Harris. He didn't need to say more. The look in his eyes told her he wasn't sure they could pull this off. Sarah glanced at the landing checklist taped to the dashboard. It was standard procedure to run through it step by step, but tonight she had already memorized every item, every number, every risk. She had rehearsed this approach in her mind for hours, though in reality she'd had only minutes to plan. Flaps 20. The hydraulic whine echoed through the cabin as the flaps extended. The C-130 shuddered slightly, the sound blending with the distant thump of gunfire somewhere beyond the coastline. Down below, the SEAL team was moving toward the makeshift landing zone, taking cover in the shadows of palm trees and half-collapsed shacks. Every second Sarah delayed meant they were more exposed. She knew the ground commander, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morgan, and she could almost picture him, crouched low, radio in hand, trusting her to do the impossible. The radio crackled. Whiskey 1 to Eagle. Be advised, we have incoming. Footmobiles, about 40 hostiles, closing from the north. Harris looked over. 40 hostiles, Sarah. If we don't land now, we land now. She cut him off. Her voice was steady, but her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears. Lightning lit up the horizon again, briefly illuminating the strip. The damage was worse than the aerial recon photo had shown. Deep trenches cut across the dirt. Pools of rainwater gleamed in the moonlight. Part of the strip sloped away into nothing where the heavy rains had carved out the earth. She would have only 2/3 of the original distance to land, and even that was risky. "Gear down," she said. The landing gear groaned into position, and she felt the subtle shift in drag as the wind caught the wheels. 1 minute to touchdown. Sarah took a deep breath and adjusted her grip on the yoke. The final approach was where mistakes killed pilots. Too high, and they'd overshoot. Too low, and they'd clip the tree line. Too slow, and they'd stall. Too fast, and the damaged strip would tear the landing gear apart. Her headset crackled again, Jake's voice cutting through the static. "Eagle, we're at the LZ. We're lit for you." Far ahead, faint lights flickered. Not runway lights, but infrared beacons, invisible to the naked eye, visible only through her heads-up display. The SEALs had placed them in what little flat space was left. 30 seconds. Harris murmured. His hand hovered near the throttle. "You've got crosswinds picking up, gusting 25 from the left." Sarah didn't answer. Her mind tunneled into that razor-thin space where instinct, training, and courage merged. She could feel the plane's weight, hear every creak of the frame, every rush of air over the wings. The C-130 was a warhorse, powerful, dependable, but even warhorses broke under the wrong strain. The first tracer round streaked upward from the tree line, arcing lazily toward them. "Incoming fire," Harris said unnecessarily. "Hold steady," she replied, nudging the yoke a fraction to the right, compensating for the gust. The ground rose. Faster now. In the cockpit, every alarm seemed louder, every vibration sharper. Her focus narrowed to the beacons, the landing zone, and the exact moment she would flare the aircraft. 10 seconds, Harris called. Sarah's heartbeat slowed. She felt the moment in her bones, the weightlessness before commitment, the point, where there was no turning back. Throttle idle. Flare, now. The C-130's nose lifted slightly, the main wheels dropping toward the earth. A split second later, a bone-jarring thud filled the cabin. Dust exploded around them as the tires bit into the dirt. The plane skidded violently, the rudder fighting to keep them aligned. Sarah's arms strained against the yoke as the aircraft threatened to veer into the trenches. "Reverse thrust," she ordered, her voice tight. Harris slammed the levers forward, and the engines roared in reverse, the sound deafening. The C-130 shuddered, slowed, then slammed to a halt just meters before the washed-out edge. For 2 seconds, there was silence. Then Sarah's voice broke. Get them on board. Now." Outside, the rear ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. SEALs emerged from the darkness in small bursts of movement, covering each other as they ran. The dull thump of distant gunfire grew louder. Shadows flitted between palm trees. Harris glanced at her. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before they're on us." "Plenty of time," she lied. Inside, the loadmaster waved the SEALs aboard. Gear. Clattered, boots pounded against the metal deck, and someone shouted over the roar of the engines. Sarah's eyes stayed on the instruments, but her peripheral vision caught movement beyond the strip, the shimmer of muzzle flashes in the darkness. Jake's voice came through the headset. "Last man aboard." "Go, go, go." Sarah's hands tightened on the controls. "Ramp up. Hold on to something." She shoved the throttles forward, the C-130 lurching down the battered strip. The engines screamed. The debris blurred past the cockpit windows. Behind them, tracer fire chased the tail of the plane. Ahead, the ragged end of the strip loomed once again, this time in reverse. But Sarah wasn't looking back. The only way out was forward, and she had just enough runway left to lift them all into the night. The C-130's 4 turboprops roared like thunder across the jungle canopy, their vibration rattling through the fuselage as Captain Sarah Calloway pushed the throttle forward. Every rivet in the airframe seemed to know this was going to be its Hardest landing yet. In the cargo bay, 12 SEALs braced themselves, gripping straps, their eyes darting toward the red light above the ramp. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Strips barely 4,000 feet, slope drops. Off at the end, the co-pilot warned, voice tense in her headset. Half of it's mud. Sarah's gaze didn't waver from the windshield. We're not here to debate the math, Mark. We're here to bring them home. On the ground, the washed-out strip was more of the suggestion than a runway, a narrow clearing carved into the jungle decades ago for crop dusters. Rain had eaten away sections, turning them into deep pits of standing water. At the far end, the slope dropped sharply toward a river. There would be no second attempt. Inside the bay, Chief Petty Officer Riker checked his watch. 2 minutes. He muttered to his team. Their gear was mud-caked, uniforms torn from the running firefight they'd endured for 3 days. Extraction had been the plan, but the enemy had swarmed the only passable road out. They'd sent the call for air support with one instruction. Any plane, any strip. Sarah's hands were steady, but her heartbeat was an unbroken drum roll. She'd flown combat landings before, but never like this. The C-130 wasn't built for tightrope act landings on half a runway, but in her mind, there was no choice. She could feel the weight of 12 lives pressing against her shoulders. Coming in hot, she called over comms. The jungle opened. In a sudden gap, the strip. She yanked the throttles back, dropped the nose slightly, and extended the flaps to max. The plane began to shudder, fighting the airflow. The landing gear groaned as it locked into place. Too steep, Mark said. Exactly steep enough, she countered. The wheels hit the mud with a bone-rattling slam. Spray exploded up, splattering. Across the fuselage, as the tires dug deep into the muck. The plane swerved left, she corrected instantly. The right wingtip passed dangerously close to the tree line. Brakes, Mark barked. They're on. She shouted, muscles straining against the yoke. The anti-skid system fought for grip on the mud-slick ground. The end of the strip and the drop rushed toward them like a black wall. They stopped with less than 30 feet to spare. Everyone on board exhaled in unison, but there was no time to savor it. The ramp lowered, and the SEALs sprinted aboard. The jungle's humid air poured in, thick with the smell of smoke and cordite. Enemy gunfire crackled from somewhere beyond the tree line. Bullets smacked into the dirt, some pinging off the C-130's frame. Go, 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 Riker barked, shoving the last man aboard. Sarah's hand was already on the throttles. As the ramp rose, she powered up the engines. But mud sucked at the wheels like quicksand. The plane refused to budge. We're stuck, Mark said, panic slipping into his voice. Sarah's eyes darted to the far end of the strip. The same slope that could kill them on landing might now be their only escape. If she could get enough speed before the drop, gravity might give them the lift they needed. Everyone hold on, she ordered, voice sharp as steel. She slammed the throttles to full. The engine screamed, mud sprayed, and the C-130 lurched. Forward, tires fighting for traction. The tree line blurred. The slope loomed. Pull up, Mark yelled. Sarah yanked the yoke at the last second. The nose rose, the tail scraped, throwing sparks, but the plane broke free from the ground just as the slope fell away. For a heartbeat, they were weightless, skimming barely 20 feet over the river before the wings bit into the air. Inside, the SEALs were silent. Then Riker's voice broke through. You just saved every damn one of us. Sarah didn't answer. Her focus was forward, climbing, banking toward open sky, leaving the jungle and its gunfire behind. As the sun broke through the clouds, its light spilled across the battered C-130. They were alive. Against the odds, against reason, They were going home. And though Sarah would later insist she was just doing her job, every man aboard knew they'd witnessed something rare. A pilot willing to risk everything, not for glory, but for the people counting on her. In the quiet hum of the climb, with the jungle shrinking to a green blur below, the truth settled in. Sometimes heroism isn't about the mission. It's about the landing no one believes is possible.